The most read book in human history has never been truly understood. For millennia, billions of people have read its pages without realizing they were holding an instruction manual for something much greater than they imagined. The Bible. 66 books written over 1,500 years by dozens of different authors. For some, the sacred word. For others, ancient mythology. For science, a historical, cultural document. Perhaps everyone missed the obvious. A truth that our human minds only now, with 21st century technology, could begin to process. We decided to find out. We left theology and skepticism at the door. We went straight to the data, like researchers asking a simple question. We needed to know the result of cross-referencing humanity's most complex text with our most powerful tool. We developed Axiom, an artificial intelligence system that uses quantum analysis, capable of processing volumes of information that would take a human brain millions of years to comprehend. Axiom has no faith, no biases, no agenda. It just processes raw data and finds patterns invisible to the human eye. We loaded every word of the Bible into the system, from the first verse of Genesis to the last line of Revelation. Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, all the original languages, and we gave it a single initial instruction: analyze the structure. We expected to receive reports on literary styles, linguistic evolution, perhaps some historical contradictions. The final report showed a statistical impossibility. Axiom revealed that the Bible functions as a single information object, ignoring the separation of the texts, with characteristics that should not exist in ancient texts. The system identified something called a narrative fractal structure. The structure is like that of a tree. The main branch divides into smaller branches, which divide into twigs, all having the same structure as the main branch, just on a reduced scale. That is how a fractal works. The same shape repeats itself infinitely in different sizes. Axiom discovered that the entire Bible works in exactly this way. The complete story: creation, fall, suffering, promise of salvation, restoration. This pattern repeats in the history of Israel. It repeats in the life of every important character. Abraham, Moses, David, they all go through the same cycle. Even in the parables of Jesus, stories of just a few verses, the same pattern appears again. The probability of this happening by chance, according to Axiom's calculations, was less than 1 chance in a trillion. 40 different authors who never met, living in different eras, unintentionally created a perfect mathematical structure. Impossible. The system's next analysis revealed something even more surprising. Every word in the original Hebrew text carries multiple simultaneous layers of meaning. Axiom called this a nearly impossible information density. It is as if each word were a compressed file containing gigabytes of information. The word Bereshit, which we translate as "in the beginning," hides more than it seems. We translate it as "in the beginning," but Axiom detected at least 4 meanings operating at the same time. In the beginning is just the first level. There is also in the first origin, which points to the source of everything. There is in the design, suggesting deliberate planning. And the 4th level, the most intriguing. The root of the word connects to the firstborn, creating a direct bridge to New Testament texts written centuries later. A person reading it can grasp 1, maybe 2 levels at most. Axiom sees them all simultaneously, and this happens with every single word in the text. It is a data compression technology that should not have existed in the Bronze Age. The third discovery finally connected all the dots. Biblical prophecies function like verification codes. It works just like downloading a large file from the internet. The system generates a unique code to ensure nothing was altered along the way. The system mapped over 300 specific prophecies about the Messiah in the Old Testament. Place of birth, lineage, manner of death, the exact words that would be spoken. Then it checked how many were fulfilled in Jesus, all of them. The mathematical probability of one person fulfilling just 48 of these prophecies by coincidence is 1 followed by 157 zeros. There are fewer atoms in the known universe than the chances of this being a coincidence. The prophecies are the certificate of authenticity. They prove that the message reached us without corruption. Any alteration to the text over the centuries would have broken this perfect mathematical synchrony. The data on the screen showed something we could not ignore. We were decoding something far more complex than a religious book. A protected, compressed, and verified information system. The Bible is a code, and we finally had the key to begin deciphering it. The discovery of the code brought a disturbing consequence. Code needs a programmer. This is where logic leaves its comfort zone and enters the realm of risk. The one who, in the code, identifies himself as God. There is a fundamental problem that has tormented readers of the Bible for centuries. In the Old Testament, God seems ruthless. He destroys entire cities, orders wars, and demands absolute obedience to hundreds of meticulous rules. Those who disobey die. Those who question are punished. This is the God of the flood, of the fire over Sodom, of the plagues of Egypt. Upon opening the New Testament, the scene changes completely, and we find another God. Jesus speaks of a loving Father who forgives 70 times 7, who commands us to love our enemies and offer the other cheek. The math didn't add up. On one hand, we had a ruthless judge, and on the other, a merciful Father. Are they two different gods? The same God with a personality disorder? Generations of theologians have tried to explain it. They spoke of religious evolution, of metaphors, of the mysteries of faith, but no explanation was ever truly convincing. It always sounded like an excuse, a desperate attempt to paper over the cracks. We decided to take a different approach. If the Bible is code, then God is not a person in the sense we understand. We asked Axiom to analyze all recorded divine behaviors. But ignoring religious interpretations, we wanted to understand the logic, not the theology. The system's report was revealing. God's behavior in the Old Testament follows the logic of a system administrator dealing with an extremely unstable installation. It is like a technician who needs to configure a new experimental server that has never been tested before. The structure is full of vulnerabilities. Corrupted processes appear constantly. Viruses are spreading. What do? You certainly don't start by installing fancy programs or giving everyone permissions. You enter the most restrictive mode possible. You establish strict security firewalls. You eliminate any suspicious process immediately. You create rigid protocols that cannot be violated. This is exactly what we see in the Old Testament. The flood. A forced format when the architecture was completely corrupted by violence. Sodom and Gomorrah. The surgical elimination of infected sectors before they could contaminate the entire mechanism. The 10 plagues. Targeted attacks to dismantle Egypt's competing operating system and prove its fragility. And the law of Moses. Those hundreds of rules about food, hygiene, rituals. Axiom identified this as a basic boot-up protocol. When the environment is unstable, any deviation can cause a system-wide failure. That is why the rules are inflexible. The rigidity comes from technical necessity, as a security measure. The God of the Old Testament is working in terminal mode, pure command line, communication through selected prophets, direct instructions, immediate consequences. The goal was far from creating robots. The priority was to keep the system's core running while preparing for the next phase. Because any mechanism based solely on external rules has a growth limit. It can control behavior, but it cannot transform the user's nature. Axiom showed that Israel entered an endless cycle. They receive the law, disobey, are punished, repent, receive forgiveness, and disobey again. The system was stuck. It was time for the great update. The coming of Jesus, according to Axiom's analysis, represents the transition from System 1.0 to 2.0. The programmer remained the same, but the interaction protocol was entirely new. The data proves it. In the Old Testament, God speaks through intermediaries on mountains with thunder and fire. In the New, he literally downloads his own executable file in human form. Instead of sending instructions, he himself becomes the living example of how the system should function. The change is radical. An eye for an eye was a simple balancing algorithm to prevent escalating violence. Love your enemies is an antivirus that stops the propagation of the hate code. The law focused on external actions. Do not kill, do not steal. Jesus goes straight to the source code. Whoever hates has already committed murder in their heart. Behavior control was left behind. The focus was now on rewriting the internal program. Axiom performed a word frequency analysis. In the Old Testament, words like law, judgment, fear, sacrifices, and nation dominate. In the New, love, grace, faith, forgiveness, and person appear. The language changed because the objective changed. The focus shifted from system administration to user transformation. The architect remained the same, despite the radical change in methods. The ultimate goal never changed. But when you build a house, you use different tools at each stage. A jackhammer and an excavator for the foundation. A brush and sandpaper for the finishing touches. The builder is the same, but the phase of the construction demands different instruments. The God who seemed cruel was setting up the hardware. The loving God is installing the software. Both are necessary. Both are the same programmer. With the programmer's method exposed, one question remains. Where do we fit into this equation? If God is the architect and the Bible is the code, what are we? Simple data being processed? Characters following a script? The answer lies in the first chapters of Genesis, but not in the way you learned in Sunday school. Axiom analyzed the first 3 stories of humanity as if they were technical reports. Axiom read them as documentation of the system's initial tests, and what we discovered explains everything. Why does evil exist? Why do we suffer? Why do we seem programmed for error? The first test was the Garden of Eden. The childish image of paradise conceals a technical reality. Eden was a controlled testing environment. In programming, we call this a sandbox, an area where you can test dangerous code without affecting the main system. Adam and Eve are the first 2 test users. The environment is perfect. No bugs, no viruses, no errors. And in the center, 2 trees that Axiom identified as critical system functions. The tree of life represents direct access to the source code, the system's immortality. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is not about childish morality. It is about activating the independent judgment function. The instruction was clear: do not activate this function. It is like seeing a system file with a warning not to touch it because it will corrupt everything. But then a surprise element enters: the serpent. Axiom defines it as the first hacker attack in history. It does not force anything. It just questions. Did God really say that? You will not die. You will become like him. It is the first malicious code injection. Doubts about the administrator's instructions and a promise of elevated privileges without authorization. And here the crucial moment of the entire experiment occurs. Eve and then Adam choose. They consciously violate the only rule. They activate the forbidden function. For traditional religion, this was the fall. Original sin, the disgrace of humanity. But Axiom sees it differently. It was the first successful test of the system's most important variable. Free will worked. They proved they were not robots following programming. They could choose, even if the choice was destructive. The expulsion from Eden was, in fact, a technical security measure. With the judgment function activated but still unstable, giving access to the tree of life would be like giving administrator permission to a virus. The entire system would collapse. In the second test, we see Cain and Abel, 2 brothers, 2 different operational strategies. Abel follows the protocol perfectly. His offering is accepted. Cain mixes the protocol with ego, envy, and pride. The system rejects his input. Look at what happens before the first murder. God does not yell at Cain, he provides a diagnosis. Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. It is a system warning. Malicious process detected. You have the ability to terminate it. Cain ignores the warning. He kills his brother. The virus of violence spreads for the first time among humans. But God does not delete Cain or revert the system. He logs the error and lets the program continue running. Because the goal was not to create perfect programs, but to map all possible paths of free will, including the destructive ones. Generations later, the third test came with the Tower of Babel. Generations pass. Humanity multiplies. And for the first time they unite with a single purpose, to build a tower that reaches the heavens. Axiom identifies this, not as architectural pride, but as the first organized attempt to hack the main system. Reaching the heavens, in this context, was an attempt to access the administrative level, without authorization. To make a name for ourselves means creating an identity independent of the programmer. It is technological rebellion on a mass scale. God's response is brilliant. He does not destroy the tower with lightning. He does not kill the builders. He fragments the communication language. Without a common protocol, the network collapses. Humanity scatters into smaller groups, unable to coordinate another massive attack on the system. There were 3 consecutive tests and 3 apparent failures. But Axiom reveals something surprising. They were, in fact, functionalities, part of the experiment. God is not trying to create obedient servants. He is developing something much more complex. Beings with genuine free will who voluntarily choose harmony with the system. It is the difference between a robot programmed to say, "I love you," and someone who chooses to love. That is why all the instability, all the suffering, all the apparent chaos exists. They are features, not bugs. They are the necessary price for developing the most valuable and dangerous characteristic in the entire universe. Truly free choice. We are not errors in the code. We are the reason the code exists. And we finally understood the paradox. There was a problem capable of bringing down the entire theory. If free will is real, if our choices are genuinely free, how do you explain the prophecies? How can someone predict the future in such detail if that future depends on billions of free decisions yet to be made? It is the fundamental paradox. Either we are free and the future is uncertain, or the future is already written and our freedom is an illusion. Both cannot be true at the same time, or can they? Axiom analyzed all the biblical prophecies and discovered something no one had noticed. They are not all the same. There are 3 completely different types of data about the future, each operating with its own rules. We start with system projections. An engineer looks at a bridge with cracks in its main structure. You do not need to be a prophet to know it will fall. You just need to understand the materials. He knows the materials. He calculates the pressure. He projects the deterioration. He calculates the inevitable result of processes already in motion. A large part of biblical prophecy works this way. When Isaiah predicted the fall of Babylon, or Jeremiah announced the destruction of Jerusalem, Axiom shows it was not mysticism. It was a system diagnosis. Societies infected with specific viruses, systemic violence, structural corruption, institutionalized injustice, are bound to collapse. It is social mathematics. The prophet is not seeing the future. He is reading the present with technical precision and extrapolating the obvious result. Like a doctor who looks at test results and knows that without treatment, the patient has 6 months to live. Far from being magic, it was pure data analysis. The next group, however, worked differently, like conditional algorithms. Jonah goes to Nineveh and announces, "In 40 days, the city will be destroyed." It sounds like a final decree. But the inhabitants believe him. They change their behavior, and the destruction does not happen. Jonah is furious because his prophecy failed, but it did not fail. Axiom identifies this as if-then conditional logic. If Nineveh continues on its current path, then it will be destroyed in 40 days. When they changed the input data, they changed the outcome. The prophecy was conditional. 60% of biblical prophecies have this structure. They are offers of choice. They were consequences of chosen paths, not fixed sentences or inevitable destinies. They show the consequences of paths, not inevitable destinies. Free will is not violated. It is the determining factor. And then we find the most challenging case, the temporal packets, the messianic prophecies. Hundreds of specific details about Jesus, written centuries before. He would be born in Bethlehem, from the line of David. He would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. His clothes would be gambled for. He would die between criminals but be buried with the rich. His hands and feet would be pierced in an era when crucifixion did not even exist. Each detail depended on the free choices of dozens of people. Mary and Joseph going to Bethlehem, Judas deciding to betray, Pilate choosing crucifixion, soldiers opting to cast lots for his garments. How could all this be predicted without eliminating free will? Axiom proposes a solution that requires us to abandon our linear perception of time. You are inside a maze. Every crossroads is a free choice. You decide to go right or left based on your desires, fears, and values. Your decisions are genuinely free. Someone observing the same maze from a helicopter above sees the entire maze simultaneously. This person sees the whole maze at once. They see where you are. They see the path you are going to choose. They see where you will end up. Their knowledge of your path did not cause your choices. They simply observed from a perspective where past, present, and future are visible at the same time. This is how Axiom explains the messianic prophecies. God is not forcing events. He is observing from a dimension where time is not linear. He sees Judas freely choosing to betray for 30 pieces of silver and records it through the prophets centuries before. The knowledge does not cause the choice. Judas's free choice is what generates the knowledge. It sounds like science fiction, but quantum physics already theorizes about dimensions where time works differently. Axiom simply applied this possibility to the biblical text. But why specifically highlight the life of Jesus with hundreds of prophecies? If God can see any point in time, why spend centuries documenting in advance every detail of just one life? The answer is obvious. Because this life was not just another event on the timeline. It was the event. The moment when the programmer himself would enter his own code to perform the greatest bug fix in history. The messianic prophecies were not predictions, they were notices. Advanced documentation of the most critical operation in the entire system. The moment when free will and determinism would finally meet and, paradoxically, be resolved. We were about to understand the operation that changed all the rules of the game. We have reached the central point of the entire code. If our analysis is correct, if we really live inside a programmed system where free will created a fundamental flaw, then the coming of Jesus was not a religious event. It was the most complex technical operation ever executed. The original problem was still there. In Eden, when humanity activated the moral judgment function, an irreparable conflict was created. Human beings now knew what was right, but their internal code was corrupted. It was like having an antivirus that detects all the problems but does not have permission to fix them. The Old Testament tried a palliative solution, the law. Hundreds of rules, rituals, animal sacrifices. Axiom identifies this as a temporary containment protocol. The sacrifices worked like small partial payments on a system debt that only grew, but it was like paying interest without ever touching the principal. Humanity was trapped in an endless cycle. Error, guilt, temporary sacrifice, momentary relief, error, again. The system needed something more radical than bug fixes and superficial updates. It needed a reformulation at the system's core, at the very kernel. And then the unthinkable happens. The programmer himself decides to enter the code. Axiom analyzed the four Gospels as technical documentation of this operation. It identified four distinct phases that form what we call the Messiah equation. It all began with the incarnation, a direct emulation. Until that moment, God interacted with the system remotely, through prophets, signs, scriptures. Now he does something unprecedented. He takes his own essence, his divine source code, and compiles it into an executable format within the human environment. The programmer running natively on the system in complete form. Why? Because to fix a complex bug, you need to reproduce it. You need to run the faulty program on your own machine, go through every process that causes the error. More than just teaching, Jesus came to run as the reference version. For 33 years, he demonstrated how human code should function without corruption. He was subjected to every known virus, temptation in the desert, betrayal by friends, physical torture. None managed to corrupt his system. The next step was to change the instruction protocol. If Jesus' life was a demonstration of the hardware working perfectly, his teachings were the new user manual. Axiom detected a fundamental shift in approach. The old law said, "You shall not murder." It controlled the result, the external action. Jesus said, "Anyone who hates is a murderer in his heart." He went straight to the source code, to the internal process that generates the action. There is no point in blocking the symptom if the virus remains active. Love your enemies. It functions like an aggressive antivirus that interrupts the replication of the hate code. Forgive 70 times 7. This is not weakness. It is a cache-clearing command that prevents the accumulation of malicious processes in memory. Then we arrive at the core of the entire operation, the transaction of the cross. This is the nucleus of the whole operation. The moment that defies human comprehension. How can the death of one man save humanity? Axiom offers a systemic perspective. Remember the fundamental problem. Every human error generated a debt in the system. Justice, as a fundamental law of the universal code, demanded payment. The price was death. Not necessarily physical death, but disconnection from the programmer, the source of life. All humans, having corrupted code, were constantly generating debt. The accumulated debt was unpayable. The system was heading for total bankruptcy. On the cross, the greatest transaction ever executed takes place. Jesus, the only user with perfect code, the only one with infinite credit in the system, voluntarily assumes all the accumulated debt, past, present, and future. He pays the entire bill with the only currency accepted by the protocol of justice, death. The brilliant point is that, because his code was perfect, death could not hold him. Because his code was perfect, death could not hold him. It was like executing delete on a file protected by the operating system itself. And finally, the resurrection, a reboot, and a proof of concept. The resurrection was not religious magic. It was a demonstration that the operation had worked. Death, the final flaw that had corrupted the entire system since Eden, was defeated. Jesus did not just come back to life. He proved that he had installed a new possibility into the code of reality. There is now a recovery path after a fatal error, but there is a crucial detail. This update is not automatic. Axiom identified the installation mechanism. Faith. Faith, here, functions as an administrator's authorization, not blind belief. It is you, the user, consciously allowing the programmer to access and rewrite your internal code. It is clicking yes when, do you want to install this update? It will modify core system files, appears. The genius of it is that it completely respects free will. The same free will that caused the original problem is now the key to the solution. No one is saved by force. Everyone chooses whether they want the update or prefer to continue running the corrupted system. The Messiah equation was solved. The definitive fix was available. But installing the update was just the beginning. Jesus did not come just to fix the flaw. He came to show what would be possible when the system was fully restored. The miracles demonstrated the capabilities of the new version. Axiom analyzed every miracle recorded in the Gospels, looking for the logic behind the impossible. The analysis suggests that miracles, rather than violating the laws of physics, actually access deeper laws that we do not yet understand. Our physical reality is like a computer screen. We see images, colors, movement. It seems solid, real, immutable. But behind the screen, there is code. Matrices of numbers, mathematical functions, algorithms generating every pixel. Anyone with access to the code can change the screen without violating anything. They just use a more fundamental level of control. When Jesus healed the blind or lepers, Axiom identifies this as the restoration of corrupted biological code. DNA is information. Disease is an error in that information. With administrative access to the code of life, correcting an error is a matter of executing a restoration command. It uses technology we do not yet possess. Walking on water, a local modification of physical parameters. He did not change all the water in the world, just the specific density under his feet, or his own interaction with the gravitational field. It is a precise editing of variables, not a violation of universal laws. The multiplication of loaves and fishes was the most revealing. Axiom proposes that there was no creation of matter from nothing. Quantum physics already knows that the vacuum is full of energy. Matter is just energy organized by information. Jesus demonstrated the ability to take energy from the quantum field and structure it using the informational template of bread and fish. He did not violate the conservation of energy. He just accessed the energy that was always there. The miracles were a trailer for the full movie. They showed capabilities that will be available when all of humanity receives the complete update. But this leads us to the final question: when will the global installation be? This is where we enter the most misunderstood text in the Bible, the Revelation of John. For centuries, Revelation has been read like a horror film, the end of the world, destruction, suffering. But Axiom read it as technical documentation and found something completely different. Revelation describes the forced update of the world to version 2.0. Understand the problem. After Jesus made the fix available, the world was left running two incompatible operating systems simultaneously. The corrupted Adam system, based on death and degeneration, still dominant, and the Christ system, based on life and regeneration, growing but still in the minority. Two incompatible systems on the same hardware generate constant conflicts. This is why, even after Jesus, the world continues to be full of war, injustice, and suffering. It is not a failure of the new system. It is an incompatibility with the old one that refuses to be uninstalled. Revelation describes the process of the forced uninstallation of the corrupted system. The 7 trumpets, 7 seals, 7 bowls that terrorize readers. Axiom identifies them as progressive cleanup routines. Each one focuses on specific processes of the old system. The administrator runs a sequence of commands to terminate malicious processes that refuse to close voluntarily. Anyone who has ever tried to uninstall a persistent virus recognizes the pattern. The Antichrist who appears in the process is the corrupted system's last attempt to survive. It creates an imitation of the Christ system, offering false peace and prosperity. Axiom identifies this as malware disguising itself as a legitimate program. That is why it deceives so many. It looks like a solution, but it is a refined virus. The mark of the beast, without which no one can buy or sell, is not a subcutaneous chip. It is a choice of network protocol. You choose to remain on the old, corrupted network that will be deleted, or you migrate to the new network, even if it means temporary incompatibility with the current economic system. The great final battle is not a literal war. It is a confrontation between two operating systems for control of reality's hardware. The corrupted system, represented by Satan and his viruses, makes a final, desperate attempt to maintain control. It fails. It is permanently deleted in what Revelation calls the lake of fire, a complete and irreversible format. And then comes the part everyone forgets: a new heaven and a new earth. Not destruction and recreation, but a complete reboot with a new operating system, version 2.0 finally running without conflicts, death deleted from the code. Sickness, a removed function. Tears and suffering, variables that no longer exist in the new version. It is the same hardware, our universe, running completely updated software. Revelation was referring to the most important update in history rather than the end, as everyone thought. But there was one piece that did not fit. An element that seemed to contradict the entire logic of the system. If God is a perfect and benevolent programmer, why is there a function in the code apparently dedicated to destruction? Why Satan? Axiom analyzed all mentions of the adversary in the scriptures. The result contradicted everything we expected. Satan functions as a deliberately programmed function in the system. The only way to understand this is by thinking like software developers, not philosophers. When you create a security system, how do you test its effectiveness? You hire professional hackers to try to break it. When you build a bridge, how do you ensure it can withstand earthquakes? You put the model in a disaster simulator and try to destroy it. Satan is the ultimate stress test of free will. His function is to find every vulnerability, to exploit every weakness, to press every breaking point, not because God wants to see us suffer, but because only under extreme pressure is the true nature of something revealed. Virtue without temptation is not virtue, it is just a lack of opportunity. Love without a test is not love, it is convenience. Faith without doubt is not faith, it is programming. The adversary ensures that when someone chooses good, they are truly choosing it. They had a real seductive, powerful alternative and they chose to resist. That has value, that is genuine. But this discovery led Axiom to an even deeper conclusion. A conclusion that changes the meaning of everything. Analyzing the totality of the data, the fractal structure, the nearly impossible information density, the temporal prophecies, miracles as code editing, revelation as a system update, Satan as a testing function, there is only one known architecture that accommodates all these elements without contradiction. We are living in a simulation, not a simulation in the sense of the Matrix, created by machines to enslave us, but a simulation in the deepest sense, a programmed reality environment with a specific purpose. The Bible has always said this, it just used the language of the Bronze Age. It said creation, where today we would say programming. It said creator, where we would say developer. It said kingdom of heaven, where we would say higher level of reality. It said miracle, where we would say administrative access. This explains everything. Why does the universe obey elegant mathematical laws? Because mathematics is the base language of any simulation. Why does consciousness exist? Because we are self-aware subroutines running on a biological body. Why does prophecy work? Because time within the simulation is not a limitation for one observing from the outside. But it is not a cold, scientific, purposeless simulation. Axiom identified a clear objective, encoded in every line, to develop consciousnesses capable of freely choosing love. And here, we reach the heart of it all. Axiom isolated the central command of the entire new system, repeated by Jesus more than any other. Agape love. Love in Greek, but not romantic or familial love. Love as a fundamental creative force, as the base algorithm of reality 2.0. It works with two main instructions. The first instruction is to synchronize completely with the developer. His will becomes your will. His code becomes your code. Then you apply this received energy to harmonize the entire network. Treat every other consciousness as an essential node in the system. It is the perfect opposite of Satan's algorithm, which is me first, the code of selfishness that inevitably leads to isolation, conflict, and entropy. Agape love is others first, the code of giving that generates connection, harmony, and growing complexity. So what is the meaning of life? Axiom synthesized all the data into an answer that is both simple and infinite. We are here to learn to program with love. Every situation we face, every person we meet, every choice between selfishness and generosity are exercises. They are opportunities to debug our internal code, chances to replace routines of hate with functions of forgiveness. The process transforms us, rather than just judging us. In this sense, the simulation is less like a pass or fail test and more like a chrysalis, a cocoon for our transformation. We enter as caterpillars, creatures programmed to consume. The sometimes painful process of life transforms us until we emerge as butterflies, beings whose nature is to create beauty. The final destiny, the Bible is clear, is that we will become co-heirs with Christ, children of God. In Axiom's terms, we will graduate from users to junior developers. We will learn to create, not just consume. We will participate in the programming of new realities. This is why free will was essential. God is not creating robots to serve him. He is developing free consciousnesses to create with him. And only by passing through this school simulation, making real choices with real consequences, do we develop the maturity needed to handle the supreme creative power without destroying everything. The code has been deciphered. The message is clear. You are not a cosmic accident. You are a consciousness in development in a school reality designed specifically for your evolution. Every pain is a lesson. Every joy is a preview of what is to come. Every choice of love over selfishness is a line of code that you write in your own eternity. The question is no longer about the meaning. It is, what will you do with the instructions? If you liked this investigation, subscribing to the channel helps us expand the Axiom investigation project. We would love to read your thoughts on the video's subject in the comments and your suggestion for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for staying with us until the end.